Yeah, I mean, one thing I thought, well, this could be used as a sort of a kind of, I said it's a two-dimensional checklist because, it's not a list, but it's kind of, where you can walk through it and see, okay, in what I did so far in my analysis, did I describe the social structures, did I describe the student intent, and so on. So it's something that we can use to really review and verify that we haven't missed anything. Has anyone tried to use it in that way?
We discussed that's how it should be used. Same idea, yes. It's good as a checklist to go through and say. But obviously, without an audience in mind, some of these change in priority as well. So assessment that goes down to, for example, accreditation. Well, that's an interesting area, isn't it? Because some audiences might want accreditation as well. So.
Okay,
some elements to raise points about how we actually do design it in some senses as well. So as you go through, it gives the design elements that you need to kind of consider and check off.
So are you saying that there's some embedded assumptions
about an audience
in this about a particular audience? So this would be maybe done with a kind of a formal university course in mind, and whereas accreditation is more complex when we're talking about MOOCs.
Yeah, exactly.
As a case of and so even at the checklist, we might want to say, okay, actually I want to move one of the boxes here and add another one, or split it, or this one isn't relevant for me. So I think it is a good tool for reflecting on the analysis we've done so far, because a lot of the work we did was much more conceptual, and I think there is a need for some sort of more formalistic structure. I'm not sure we hit it right yet with this tool, so it might be something that we need to reflect on the tool, give that input back to Simon, and then he'll hopefully produce a new version of this. Rona had an example of a different tool, which was, am I right to say, I was sort of the far other extreme, in the sense that it was a very simple tool which had 5 boxes, right, compared to the sort of multitude of boxes here. So I think we need to try to look at those 2 examples and find something in between.
All of them into space.
Yeah, and it's something we need to kind of adequately to think about. Okay, what are the tools we need in order to sort of verify and evaluate the account that we have of the context and the environment before we go into the actual design process?
Well, I mean, as a checklist, the way you described it, it's quite useful because it does cover a lot of ground, more than I think we covered already this morning, but it was as if we needed a process for how best to use it. As soon as we started looking at, we're worrying about students' intent and aims, because they're going to be many and varied, and that's what we've already discerned in the previous exercise. As soon as you look at this, you see that the what is to be learned should be influenced by the students' intents and aims, and yet that arrow isn't there. So then you start drawing in more arrows, and then you start worrying the whole thing's just going to be a mess of arrows. So you want to go back to that process, which is where Simon started in his presentation, was the design process. So I think it's got the beginnings of the checklist, kind of checklist we need, but we also need a process for how to work with it.
So
the feedback loops should be there. That's true.
It's a bit like, if you think of a cookbook, you have the list of ingredients, but you don't have the recipe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I suppose with a cookbook, you know that you're making a particular cake. So with a MOOC, because you don't know who's turning up with what expectations, I think that the design has to be capable of reacting. So I think this sort of process here as a checklist is fine, but there's implicit in this is this idea that you're going to create something that is quite tightly structured and predictable. Whereas through the previous exercises, we're kind of discovering that, I mean, as you're saying, that perhaps in some ways the participants themselves will steer and drive what actually happens.
Yeah, but that's all the more reason to be carefully planned and able to.
I'm not saying not plan. I'm not saying that flexibility doesn't mean that you're not planning.
Yeah.
But this many boxes would probably encourage you to take quite a heavily structured route, because at the moment everything is a variable, and so that makes it too multifaceted. If you see what I mean, there's no fixed point as yet, apart from the general subject area. Oh no, I'm kind of crossing over to this afternoon, so I'll stop.
I think that's fine because we are drawing sort of, this is kind of drawing to the close of this part of the day, and so we should actually. It's good. Actually, I bet. Do you want to?
Lunch is there.
No, but we're thinking it would actually be good to capture this discussion on flip, on flip camera.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's.
Well, anyway, I think it's. It's a very good point. I think that the exercises we did the morning really kind of brought out the complexity of the creature we're dealing with, which I think any learning design is always dealing with lots of complexity. But when we're talking about the MOOC, where we don't know yet how many students we have, where they're coming from, what they're looking for, and so on, we don't even know for certain who would be involved in facilitation. And we assume it's us, but we hope there'll be a wider circle of people as well. So there's a lot of variables there, and I think I agree with Dan. That means that we actually need to be very explicit in the way that we design it, because otherwise it'll just fall apart. I mean, if we had 5 people working full time on facilitating the MOOC for 10 weeks, then we can be completely responsive and reactive and just sort of orchestrated as we go along. I think as it stands, we need to come up with some very robust structures that then allow that flexibility within